Thanks for joining us for an introduction to the Progressive Era, which kind of ran from 1890 to 1920. Really, this era was an age of reform as the nation was responding to the effects of America continuing to industrialize. And no industrialist probably had a bigger impact on the way of manufacturing than Henry Ford. Ford was known to kind of wander the lines, kind of asking his workers how they were doing and how he could improve their condition. And one way he did so was in 1914 when he instituted the $5 day. Now, this was almost double that of other manufacturers of the time period. And what it did was it kind of cut down on worker absenteeism. It created workers taking more pride in their work, not calling in sick. It kind of lowered the amount of people he had to fire because it was such a huge increase over what other companies were paying. But what it also did was it allowed his own workers to buy the product that he was making. The Model T. In 1908, it took about, each Model T cost about $950. And over 19 years of production, over 15 million Model Ts were sold, and the price per unit actually dropped to $280 per car. But what Ford found out was a smaller unit of profit on a larger number of sales would create enormous revenue and great profit. So he was able to make more money by selling more cars at a cheaper price. And what we see is that the car kind of evolved from a luxury item for the wealthy to an essential mode of transportation for the ordinary man. With the constantly moving assembly line, he could also speed up the production and so that a Model T was rolling off the lines roughly every 24 seconds. And with more people owning cars, we needed to improve our road system. And so Congress passed the Federal Aid Roads Act, which provided $75 million for the construction of these roads. And it shifted from state and local responsibility to more of a federal responsibility as it cost money and organization. But to get this money to build these roads, the federal government required that states establish highway departments that would eventually create two-lane all-weather roads, which would kind of be a precursor to the 1956 Eisenhower interstate highway system that we know today. But in all reality, with this growth of cars and roads, it does affect the urbanization process as well. As shifts in where people live will be changed as they can travel easier. We see the growth of suburbs and this highway system that I already mentioned. And with the growth of these large businesses, we see that mass production is taken to a whole new level as the size of these companies and speed at which they can get work done, as well as their markets, all continue to grow. So these large corporations are able to produce more goods more cheaply. However, with that, we also see the birth of what kind of becomes known as oligopolies, like Standard Oil. Whereas a monopoly is when one company controls the production of some sort of commodity. An oligopoly is when there is control of a commodity by a small number of large companies, today like airplanes, cell phones, appliances, and cars. Now, some people argued that government should try to control these large corporations and try to regulate them more. But regardless, there was a considerable amount of mergers and consolidations during this time, creating these large businesses that had kind of created several issues for their workers and society in general. And as these companies grew in size, we had to kind of figure out ways to manage them better and more efficiently. And Frederick Winslow Taylor, in his Principles of Scientific Management, talked about how there should be work standards and cooperation. And what we see is, he tries to say that businesses should kind of create these rules and kind of try to control the workplace and who goes where and when to try to establish routines, because what we see is that as businesses grew and kind of became more impersonal, some of the tasks would become repetitive and tedious, and sometimes that would lead to more mistakes and injuries. But we also see the growth of kind of more investment in research and development, trying to kind of create better products and new products to be able to be sold on the markets. So we really kind of see this evolution of kind of business and how it should be ran. But as companies focused more on like the speed of which work was being done and trying to make more money and worried less about their workers, we also see that there's tragic events that cost people their lives. For example, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company in March of 1911 in New York. And what had happened was it was a garment manufacturer, and they kind of locked the fire escapes. There was only a couple elevators that would get workers up to their stations. And what eventually happens is that a fire breaks out on one of the upper levels. And with no way to escape, many women actually jumped out of the windows to their death. And in all, 146 people lost their lives. And what this does is it kind of forces state and national attention on working conditions to try to improve them and make them safer. And again, that's kind of what the progressive era kind of embodies, is trying to correct some of these poor working and living conditions of which people were experiencing during this time. And then some other changes that were going to be taking place here during this time is kind of reaching the masses, where even if electricity and phone service couldn't reach the country, we do see the creation of what becomes known as a parcel post, which allowed for packages and not just letters to be delivered through the mail. We also see the creation of rural free delivery in 1893, which would provide delivery to the country of these letters and packages as well. So you wouldn't have to maybe go to town to the post office or something like that to get it, or pay once you received it. In this, we're going to see this kind of progressive era. There's going to be all sorts of changes at national, local levels, dealing with all sorts of different issues. And one of those issues is dealt with by Margaret Sanger. As we saw kind of during this era, a decline in the birth rate, an increase in the divorce rate, people kind of thought that these things would endanger the home. In fact, 3 million children in 1900, ages 5 to 15 years of age, worked in some sort of business or factory. That's about 20% of that age population. And Margaret Sanger actually then, to try to protect the families and homes and women's rights, tried talking about birth control. And what eventually happens is that the government will pass what becomes known as the Comstock Law, which criminalized the sale and distribution of material used or literature for discussing abortion and contraception. They're trying to, they thought, uphold the morality of the country and try to do away with obscene literature and immoral articles and attitudes of people. But Sanger kind of continues this crusade for contraception and as a way to protect women's rights and protect the family in reality. But we're going to take a look at other reforms during this progressive era in our next episode.